When it comes to Star Trek plots, every rule is made to be broken, whether it's about safely making out with attractive aliens or just not blowing up an entire civilization. These are some of the biggest rules Starfleet has to follow, and the exciting times they didn't. The Prime Directive is easily the most crucial rule that Starfleet follows. The General Order 1 states, no starship may interfere with the normal development of any alien life or society. While this generally means that the Enterprise can't land on a planet and get involved in their politics, technology, or cultural traditions, it's most often used to describe how nobody should mess around on primitive planets that haven't developed a warp drive yet. Breaking the Prime Directive is central to the plot of many Star Trek episodes across many series, since the letter of the law plays out differently when lives, and sometimes entire civilizations, are at risk. An organization as advanced as Starfleet can often just step in and save an entire world, but according to the Prime Directive, they shouldn't. Was it wrong for Worf's brother to beam a bunch of aliens to a holodeck to save them from a crumbling planet? How about when Data became space pen pals with a little girl on another dying planet? Or when a Starfleet observational station on an alien planet experienced technical difficulties and revealed the existence of high-tech spacemen to the undeveloped townspeople? Almost every captain in the franchise has violated the Prime Directive in one way or another, and they're often called to task about it.
Would it surprise you to learn that you have violated the Prime Directive a total of 9 times since you took command of the Enterprise?
But ultimately, morality and galactic benevolence always seem to win out. The Prime Directive is serious stuff, even if it's usually a little flexible in order to tell a good story. But time travel rules are much more serious. People seem to travel back and forth through time constantly, which at one point led to a temporal Cold War between multiple mysterious alien races. As a result, to prevent anyone from seriously messing up the timeline, Starfleet enacted the Temporal Prime Directive, which strictly limits a person's actions in the past. Starfleet personnel cannot perform any actions or provide any information about the future that might change the past, which might change the course of history. While it's one of Starfleet's most restrictive laws, the Temporal Prime Directive has been violated scores of times, sometimes on purpose, and sometimes by accident. One of the first times this appeared was on the original series episode The City on the Edge of Forever, where Kirk is prevented from saving the life of a woman he loves. If she lives, Starfleet will never exist. The conclusion of Voyager depends entirely on Janeway dropping future knowledge on her past self. And when Captain Sisko finds himself during the collapse of civilization in 2024, he accidentally gets iconic revolutionary Gabriel Bell killed and must take his place. And with the Department of Temporal Investigations keeping an eye on everything in the background, we can assume that the Star Trek timeline we're watching is relatively intact. Starfleet is ultimately an exploratory and defensive service run by the United Federation of Planets, but combat is never too far from a captain's mind when traveling through an aggressive universe. Starships engage in combat more often than they'd like, and those actions can be very limited because of Starfleet's General Order 12, the rules of engagement. First and foremost, Starfleet maintains a no-first strike policy, so a starship can only fire if fired upon, which somewhat mirrors US Navy policy. This rule can be broken if a ship's survival is at stake, but such actions are rare and highly scrutinized. Starships must attempt communications before taking any action, which is why a captain will order a red alert instead of immediately engaging when a ship's weapon systems are fired up. And if they have to fire, they often just aim to maim instead of destroy. This rule applies in most situations, but when facing an enemy vessel like the Borg, those general orders are chucked out of the nearest airlock. Space fights are inevitable, but to try to avoid anything too disastrous, Starfleet has signed several treaties with other species. One of the most limiting is 2311's Treaty of Algeron, a peace accord signed between the United Federation of Planets and the Romulan Star Empire. The treaty was formed around 160 years after the Earth-Romulan War ended. Notably, the Treaty of Algeron defined and reinforced a Romulan neutral zone, an area of space that was off-limits for all travel, in order to avoid accidental conflicts. Entering the neutral zone without prior knowledge was an act of war, but it wasn't the most limiting aspect of the treaty. Most significantly, the Treaty of Algeron prohibited the Federation from researching, inventing, or utilizing cloaking technology, one of the things that tended to give the Romulans and Klingons the upper hand in many conflicts. This hampered Federation efforts for decades, causing problems when engaging with other species that freely exploited this technology. The Federation was gifted a cloaking device by the Romulans once before the 31st century, during its conflict with the Dominion in the Gamma Quadrant, but that didn't stop others from breaking the law. In the Next Generation episode, The Pegasus, we see a Starfleet admiral rushing to find an illegal Starfleet cloaking device that was lost in space before the Romulans discover the deception. Some of Starfleet's rules deal with fraternization between officers, and others deal with what to do if you fall in love with some weird space alien. And while these rules are pretty carefully codified, few people follow their hearts instead of these rules.
So, what's next? I don't know.
Regulation 1138 restricts Starfleet officers from entering into business and romantic relationships with their superiors or subordinates in their direct chain of command. The idea is to maintain good order and discipline, but the rule is rarely followed. One aspect of the regulation that's almost always enforced is a restriction placed on ship captains, who aren't really allowed to engage in a relationship with anyone beneath them. Captain Jean-Luc Picard maintained feelings for Dr. Beverly Crusher, but they didn't truly act on their feelings until after the events of Star Trek Nemesis, which resulted in the birth of their son. But Picard had a lot of love to give. He also fell in love with Lieutenant Commander Nella Darren, but when their relationship caused Picard to have trouble making life or death decisions, they realized they had to call it off. So what about Starfleet's Interspecies Protocol, which regulates the interactions between alien species and members of Starfleet? While relationships aren't prohibited, there are rules limiting them as well. All students at Starfleet Academy have to take the semester-long course about alien love as a requirement to graduate. If a member of Starfleet wants to engage in some deep space love affair, they must get approval from their commanding officer first. Why? Well, biology is just part of the problem. Enterprise's Trip Tucker becomes pregnant with an alien baby while playing a game and doesn't even know how it happened.
We took a ride in a rowboat. I swear, Captain, nothing happened.
And not all aliens are there just for love. The Next Generation episode, The Game, saw an alien seductress trying to take over the Enterprise using mind control video games after convincing Commander Riker to bring the game on board. Starfleet's Handbook on Personal Relationships states, all Starfleet personnel must obtain authorization from their CO as well as clearance from their medical officer before initiating an intimate relationship with an alien species. It seems like this never actually happens, or else it all just happens off screen and we're spared the long scenes of filling out paperwork.
Computer, this is Captain Benjamin Sisko. Initiate auto-destruct sequence. Authorization Cisco Alpha 1 Alpha.
Every Federation starship has the ability to self-destruct, and has been engaged several times over the years. In most cases, a captain initiates a self-destruct to keep the ship from falling into enemy hands, or they might turn it on as a bluff to compel invaders to leave the ship. It's an oft-used plot device that only sometimes actually results in the destruction of the vessel. This is all spelled out with Starfleet Order 2005. When all hope is lost, blow up the ship in the most spectacular and complete way possible by combining matter and antimatter. General Order 6 is a rarely mentioned rule that kicks in if there's nobody left to blow up the ship. If all sentient life aboard a Federation starship dies, the ship will explode. It's only shown at once in the animated series episode Albatross, when it was invoked to protect alien species from contracting a deadly disease that had ravaged the Enterprise. In addition to the orders everyone in Starfleet is taught, several classified orders exist, limited to those in high positions of command. Of these classified general orders, the Omega Directive reigns supreme as Starfleet's most important and crucial directive. And for all of its importance, it only shows up once on TV, in the Voyager episode of the same name. The Omega Directive centers around the ultra-powerful Omega molecule.
A single Omega molecule contains the same energy as a warp core.
It's one of the most dangerous objects in the universe if weaponized, so the Omega Directive forces officers to drop everything and destroy an Omega molecule whenever one is detected. The regulation supersedes all other Starfleet orders and regulations, so if it's necessary to violate the Prime Directive or Temporal Prime Directive to destroy an Omega molecule, all bets are off. This proves problematic, as discussing the Omega Directive with anyone lower than a captain is usually strictly prohibited, making the commander's destructive decisions suspect to the rest of the crew. Starfleet follows a code of justice that employs penalties for breaking the law, but has mostly moved beyond using the death penalty to prevent criminal behavior, except when someone breaks General Order 7. No vessel under any condition, emergency or otherwise, is to visit Talos IV. Should any member of Starfleet visit with the inhabitants of Talos IV, that person was potentially subject to execution. The threat posed to Starfleet stemmed from their Talosian psychic ability to create perfect illusions, which Starfleet believed would lead to the destruction of humanity. The reasons for the regulation were classified and known only to senior staff, while everyone in Starfleet was aware that travel to the planet was prohibited. That didn't stop Spock from committing mutiny to get to Talos IV in order to save his former captain, Christopher Pike, from a lifetime of suffering. And Spock wasn't executed or even demoted, so even General Order 7 is pretty flexible when it needs to be. If starships do one thing well, it's traversing massive distances in a very short amount of time. And all of that is due to their ability to warp through space at speeds faster than light. But it took them a long time to figure out that blasting through space using massive amounts of energy was actually causing rips in the fabric of subspace. Force of nature was mostly a heavy-handed analogy about the ozone layer and humans destroying their own planet. But it also had far-reaching implications for Starfleet. They were no longer allowed to cruise above Warp 5 anymore, unless it was a real emergency. The Klingons were on board, but other alien races didn't seem to care. While the rule carried through for a few more episodes, it seemed mostly abandoned or unspoken after that. Non-canonically, it's presumed that Starfleet developed more environmentally friendly warp engines. It's hinted at in Voyager, and never touched again.